BIZCHAT with Staples Business Advantage. Practical advice and ideas to help your organization. Welcome to this episode of the BIZCHAT podcast. I'm Karen Kluthberg. In this podcast, we will discuss the educational vertical amid the COVID-19 pandemic and how parents and educators have had to pivot and be agile during this time. We are also going to talk about how organizations have also had to pivot and support those needs of learning and teaching from home. Joining us in this podcast is Jeff Macdougall, a veteran teacher and department head at Trenton High School specializing in geography, politics, and outdoor education. We also have Leslie Duffney, a parent of a teenager and director of inside sales at Staples Business Advantage. We have Claire Kelly, a marketing manager for school products at Echo Brands Canada, responsible for Hilroy and 5-star product lines. We also have Rami Gattas, co-founder and CEO of Logics Academy, a Canadian leader in K-12, STEM, robotics, and coding education. Lastly, we have Maggie Clark from Staples Business Advantage, whose expertise lies with building out the category within this vertical, and who is also a trainer for STEAM for her sellers and customers. So I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank you all for joining the BizChat podcast with Staples Business Advantage. We're going to start with our first question, and that is for Leslie and Jeff. So how is teaching and learning from home, Leslie, you being a parent, and Jeff, you being a teacher, how is it working from home and learning from home?
Well, it's a big change. Teachers are social beings, so not seeing your students in front of you all the time really changes the way you do everything. So the pedagogy part of it has been a huge challenge. In terms of just being at home, I'm sure it's different for everyone, but we certainly, at our home, we have 2 teachers here. My wife is also a teacher, so we don't really have an office set up per se. So we're constantly, well, I've got a meeting, so I get the kitchen table. You need to go to the basement for half an hour. And so we're getting our steps in that way. That's for sure. It's been a challenge, but the nicer weather has made it easier because it expands your office space on a good day. But we were kind of thrown into this with not knowing with what to expect. So we've done the best of what we can. Still sometimes saying that it's unbelievable that we're still doing it, but we certainly learned a lot in the last little bit that there's been a lot of growth in how we do things at home.
And what about you, Leslie?
Yeah, I think I would echo a lot of Jeff's sentiments as well. So it was very sudden change, very new way of learning for both my son and myself. I think that we've come a long way. I'll say that. I think the beginning was a bit of a struggle. There was a lot of trial and error. There was a lot of testing and retesting different strategies on how to help him complete work, stay focused, try to be independent, because my everyday life did not change. I'm still working full-time, as is my husband, and that obviously we're very fortunate in that aspect, but that didn't change from day one, even though he was suddenly home working from home. So I think we've come a long way. I think we're in a pretty good groove now. We've got a good routine down, but it definitely took some weeks to get to where we are now.
That's understandable. And I'm going to include you, Claire, into this question as well. But how are your kids feeling about learning from home? This must be a huge change from going to the class to now being homeschooled. So Leslie, we'll start with you. How is your son handling it? And then Claire, you can talk. I believe you have a younger child, so you'll be able to give possibly a different perspective.
Yeah, so I'll start off by mentioning that my son is 13, so we're definitely in a little bit of a different category than other people who potentially have children who are in JK to grade 5. My son was just completing grade 8 and heading into high school in September. So for him, it's probably more of the social aspect he's missing with his friends. They do spend a lot of time together at school, engaging in projects together, team assignments. Obviously, lots of time spent together at lunch and break, really having that social aspect be front and center. So he's definitely missing that. I don't know how much he's missing actual schoolwork, but I think he's doing really well at this point in regards to what he could accomplish on his own, and getting that done independently. But luckily, there's still, technology that he has that allows him to connect with his friends, whether it's on FaceTime or video game chats or whatever they do. But he too is excited to go back to school pending the announcement of what school's going to look like in September.
Great. And Claire, what about you? You have a younger child, so how is it any different?
My daughter's 5. She's in senior kindergarten. I think when the break first happened, it just came off like an extended March break for her. So she was excited. The school was still trying to figure out how to deliver the curriculum online. I think with older students, it's easier to say, oh, read your textbook. We'll talk about things in a virtual setting. For younger children, it is a little bit harder. They're used to more, hands-on instruction, more sort of group play-based learning. So it was a bit of a struggle at first, and then we got into a routine. So, the school did a really good job of having, a morning meeting every morning and delivering programming on a schedule. And that started to make things easier. There's been teething problems along the way. I think socially, she misses seeing her friends and speaking to them virtually. At age 5, they don't really have conversations. They like to sort of play games and mess around. So it's hard. You can't just say, here, why don't you call one of your friends, because they don't interact the same way that we do.
Right.
But I think now we're in a good place, and I think she's getting more and more confident with the material that she's learning and practicing. There's a lot of repetition to everything that she's doing, and she seems to be a lot more confident. She still needs a lot of support. So, like Leslie, I'm also working all day. So oftentimes, she wants to come and sit next to me to do her work, not necessarily always having help, but just having that companionship next to her. Which I hear will eventually change, and she won't want me near her when she's trying to do her work. But it's been good, and now we're about to start the summer break. So hopefully over the summer we can keep up some of the learning and keep some of the structure in place, just to keep her sort of fresh.
That's great. And Leslie, are there specific subjects that your son is having difficulties with, just based on not having, that one-on-one with the teacher or within a classroom?
Yeah, I would probably say the biggest struggle I've seen with him would be in something they hadn't quite gotten into depth in school before, trying to now do it at home. And that's really been centered more around math and science. Obviously, the teachers are trying to prep the grade 8 kids who are going into grade 9 in September for some of that work that is coming, keep them on track. It's very important, because grade 9 picks up very quickly, from which I understand, and they keep moving along pretty fast. So probably math and science, where he didn't have a good grasp on what was going on prior, has been a challenge. If he was capable and understanding what was happening prior to getting the assignment, those have been easier to complete. There hasn't been a lot of issues with things like history or geography, or even French has been okay. I would probably say science and math have been the top 2.
Okay. And again, this is for both you, Jeff, and for Leslie. Do you have a designated space that you have for teaching and learning? And I'd love to know, the details around that space.
Yeah, I'm just going to rewind for a second, hearing about the learning things. I'm an outdoor education teacher, so I'm supposed to be on a 5-day canoe trip right now. So the challenge for me have been immense, trying to teach my kids about outdoor education. There's been a lot of GoPro videos of their teacher bailing on his bike going down a hill and showing them how they want them to do it. One of the things that happened here, I don't know if it's everywhere in high school, there was no structure given to kids. It was just sort of like you're at home learning. So there's no, and teenagers are nocturnal. So for me, I'm old, so I get up early in the morning and I try to get stuff out there for them. And then we joke about it with my colleagues that it's kind of like fishing. You kind of throw something out there, and then all day you're checking your emails, or you're checking your cell phone or Google Classroom to find out if they need help with anything. And you get so excited when somebody needs some help. And then, once again, I'm old, so I go to bed early, and you wake up in the morning and your email is just full because they did all their work at 2:00 in the morning when they finished playing Call of Duty. So my work, like I said before, I don't have one workplace, because my workday literally goes all day. Not that I'm putting in 18 hours a day, but I'm just constantly checking. So fortunately, my laptop, I can just, if I'm outside in the middle of the day, I can just put it on the table and just check to see if anyone needs anything. And if I need some privacy, then I just go to a different spot. So at our home, we don't have one place where we have a printer set up because there's been a little printing that's had to happen, but we've sort of make use of whatever spot works at that time. That's just the way our house is operating, but it seems to work.
And you, Leslie?
Well, I do have a home office, just given the type of business I've always been in, being in sales. So that's actually made it easy for me to continue my work probably a little bit more smoothly than maybe some parents who all of a sudden had 1, 2, maybe 3 kids at home trying to do different things. And fortunately, I have a work laptop, so my son is able to use my personal laptop. So I've situated him up in the kitchen, at the kitchen table with the laptop and whatever he needs to work. And I have retained my office space because I do need, a lot of uninterrupted time to, the number of conference calls we have and meetings. And he's been very respectful of that. He's really good about coming downstairs quietly and checking if I'm on a call first to see if he has, to ask a question. And I frequently go upstairs in between calls to see how he's doing, which I realized very quickly I needed to. So as I said in the beginning, we've come a long way. I clearly wasn't giving enough guidelines in the beginning. I would say, okay, what do you have to do today? And okay, you work on this, and I'm going to come back and check. And as soon as I'd come down to my office, he'd be on his phone or he'd be on his laptop looking at YouTube instead of his schoolwork. So then I realized, okay, I need to piece it out. So this assignment, when I have my next conference call and it's over in an hour, I'm going to come up and see how far we are in this one. So it's just, I get my steps in too, Jeff. I'm up and down all day from the office to the kitchen to check what he's doing. And that's where we've come along, where I've kind of chunked it out and given him very specific deadlines for assignments, not just a blanket, I'll check on you at the end of the day, because he wasn't getting anything done when that was happening.
That's great. And so this question now is for Claire and Rami. So I would love to know, just, we have a teacher on the phone, we have some parents, myself included. Do you have any resources that you can share from your point of view within your organization that can help teachers or parents with learning from home?
I think from my perspective, from ACO brands, it would be more sort of products that we would recommend for students who are learning from home. So I think the biggest thing to be mindful of when you have students working from home is keeping them organized, right? Giving them, as Leslie said, they usually listen to their teachers a lot better than they listen to their parents. So telling them, hey, you need to get this done doesn't always wash very well. So getting them organized, getting them set up with a schedule. So I would say for top 5 products for students, it would be some sort of planner, so an academic year planner that they can use to sort of, put their daily tasks in. And if they have any work that's due, we would definitely recommend that. The next is a notebook. Even though they're learning a lot online and virtually, it never takes away the importance of being able to write things down in a notebook. Writing things down, retains the knowledge as you're learning. So we always would advocate for a notebook, and we offer various types of notebooks depending on the age and the need of the child. So, just a standard ruled notebook, quad ruled notebook for math and science. And then for the younger children, we have sort of Hilroy stitch books, which are geared towards handwriting, and they can draw and then write about what they've drawn underneath their picture. The next thing for students for organization would be some sort of expanding file or file folder so that they can keep their work sort of separate, organized in some way, shape, or form. They're not carrying their traditional backpack around with everything in. Maybe they're not using their binders as much because they're still going to have work that they need to keep organized and be able to find easily. The next thing is for younger children, we have a series of learning boards under our quartet lines. So they're sort of learning to handwrite boards. So just a small dry erase board that they can write on and then wipe clean. We also have one for telling the time. So for early learners, that's great. And then also arts and crafts supplies. So both for academic purposes, if they have an arts class, and also for some sort of creative release as well. So we have a number of different art lines geared towards different student ages. that we would recommend that people have at home for their kids. And then as far as for teachers, pretty similar. So a planner, a good quality notebook, probably one of our Cambridge brands notebook for sort of an adult, a more mature notebook, and then also ways to organize as well. So whether it's a binder, an expanding file, or folders, we would always recommend they use those. And then I think one of the things that my daughter's teachers use a lot is a small dry erase board. So we have a series of glass dry erase easels and boards that the teachers can use to be more interactive with the children, especially younger children. They can write something, hold it up on the camera, ask for feedback, things like that. So that's something that we would recommend also.
Those are some great resources and ideas. Thank you for that. Rami?
Yeah, well, I think the first resource I need myself is maybe a counter on the fridge door, because I'm also getting my steps, but snacking quite more often. So I think I need a tool like that for home. But on a serious note, Logix is very much focused on digital literacy, STEM, robotics, and coding education. And as an organization, we've always worked digitally with students, teachers, and parents across the country, remotely and in person. So this transition has really helped us focus and bring to life and emphasis the role of the parent in that learning sort of triangle. And that's been really critical. But from a tool perspective, I think with digital literacy and with robotics and coding, we've been very fortunate because many of the tools we use actually empower student-led learning and individualized learning environments. And so through this time period, as an organization, we've really spent a lot of time working with teachers to, number one, start with platforms. So things like Microsoft Teams and how do you actually teach in a remote learning environment, or Google Meet and conducting training. So those resources are all available for free for teachers across the country online to give them professional development and support on how they can learn and teach themselves in a remote learning environment. And then from a resources and for a parent perspective, a student perspective, and a teacher perspective, we've really leaned on tools like, for example, Microsoft Minecraft. So Minecraft's a game, and as Jeff alluded to, some of the students are gaming at home for many, many hours. But some folks might not know that actually Minecraft has an education edition with lots of learning tools that supports remote learning environments for students. With resources for the teacher, capabilities to actually host worlds remotely. And many districts and school boards across the country are taking advantage of this right now to engage their kids in something that they love and they do. I mean, Minecraft's one of the most widely played games in the world. And the fact that you can engage a child from that perspective in an educational environment with things like electricity and science and math and topics that we're looking to work with our students on and engage them to work on, but in a fun and creative ways, is fantastic. From tools in the home, we start really young, as young as 4 years old, with a completely screenless tool. So Macdougall is a fantastic resource that we find parents and children are really taking advantage of at home to teach coding and digital literacy in an unplugged methodology using physical tiles and robotic devices, but all in an unplugged, screenless environment. We know how much screen time is really increasing during this environment and time period, but how do we allocate some effective learning environment where a child and at a young age can learn critical digital skills in that play-based setting at home? So that's a wonderful tool. And then the next one that I really want to highlight is during this period, we've really ramped up the idea of a full in-depth virtual robotics experience. So how do we bring and teach students skills in robotics and coding in a virtual environment and give equity and access to everyone at home, even if they don't have the physical robot? And so Dash's Neighborhood is one of those tools and resources that are out there that are just fantastic because they allow the child to immerse themselves in a 3D world, 3D environment, to actually be able to create, not just consume a game, and be able to actually write code that they can share and collaborate with their friends on. So it's a fantastic tool from that perspective. And then the last one here that I have that I think is quite powerful is a tool. It's a programming tool as well called MBlock 5. It's a free software similar to a block-based Scratch environment that allows students to program virtual environments, but at the same time, it actually allows and teaches them how to transition, especially for middle school and secondary students, to transition from a graphical or block-based environment to a text-based, and actually be able to learn Python as a programming language and be able to integrate that with its additional modules of hardware like Halo Code or MBOT to actually do Internet of Things, IoT, which is such a hot topic in industry, but also in education today. So how do I program my own security system for the house and build it so that I know when my brother or sister are going to open my door and I can get a text message or an email and I can actually build that system myself? Or I can build a camera monitoring system, or I can build a weather monitoring, or even monitor my plants in the backyard and know when the plant needs to be watered, not when I'm available for it. So I get a notification that my plant it's really dry and humid out there and I need to go out and water it, or even build an automatic watering system. And so this really allows and pushes the envelope for students to be innovators and creators at home during this time period, all teaching critical skills in the subjects, but yet making it really fun and exciting to do at home, and really engages the whole family at home. Because you can imagine a project, if a parent's a gardener and the child's able to create something like that for them, how amazing is that their child's able to develop that themselves. So lots of great resources and tools out there for parents, students, and teachers to be part of that equation.
Well, you definitely make learning sound fun, I have to say.
Yes.
Maggie, this question is for you. So being an expert in the educational, vertical sector, how do you find all of these resources are supporting educators with what's going on right now?
That's an interesting question for sure. From the conversations I've had with my partners across the country, I actually think that we've forgotten about the educators. I think there's been a lot of focus on how are we going to arm the students so that they have what they need, whether it be devices, access to the internet, the notebooks and the supplies. But we've forgotten about how foreign this concept of learn from home is for our educators. Jeff mentioned teachers are social beings. They like to be in the classroom with their students. They're animated. They like to move around, and get involved and have those one-on-one conversations with the students. And really their relationship with the students is more than just an educator and a student. So I think they're forgotten in the last little while. I do see a change in that. I do see having conversations that there is definitely a change coming for that. But some of the tools that, are being utilized are, proper video conferencing systems, having the robotics available to the students so the teachers can lead some lessons online. We have some teachers across the country who are going into their classroom just so that they have access to their smart boards, their interactive boards, and they're delivering their lessons like that, where the kids will go to a Google Hangout, and so at least the teacher's in a comfortable, familiar place. So the resources are great that have been put out, and I think everybody was reactionary when this started in March. Rightly so. Nobody expected us to be where we are today. So, I think everybody was reactionary, and our focus was on the students, and I think that was correct. But I also think that there was a missed opportunity to keep the level of engagement up by including the needs of the educators.
That's a really great point. And Jeff, I'm sure you can agree with that. But how do you find the engagement of students has been during this pandemic from a scholastic perspective?
Well, it's like a moving target. I think that because of the way this came out and the 2 weeks we had after March break, the decision was made, and rightfully so, that making sure everybody had equal access to resources was the focus of the ministry and of most boards. So as a result of that, the general policy, to my understanding, was that if a student was successful in a course before the 13th of March, they were not going to fail the course because of the situation, the COVID situation that was there. In fact, not even their mark would go down. So if you take that idea and you put it in a teenage head, that is a real challenge for engagement. That's a massive challenge for engagement. I use Google Apps for education for almost exclusively for what I do. And so my Google Classroom, my number one tool for engagement is I just have a check-in with kids every day. And so I post it by 7:30 every morning. And sometimes it's a riddle, or sometimes it's a question that they have to go and I don't know if you're familiar with a Google a day, which is just a puzzle to help them work on their research skills. And that's my number one engagement tool, because like I explained to my students, it just lets me know that, hey, at least you're checking it. That's why I call it a check-in. So the engagement for my students was pretty good. We got into a routine where I was giving out work on Monday, Wednesdays, and they were handing it in on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And then Fridays I used for something we called it our big project. All I did was I plagiarized or bastardized the 20 time project, which is something that allowed them to pick something they wanted to learn about and to learn it and then to document their learning. So I had kids who were planting vegetable gardens, to learning how to play guitar, to painting their pickup truck. I mean, whatever interests them, they got to do. But that was their Friday type of thing. And then they would have to send me a video at the end of at each Friday evening or Saturday morning to show me what they did that day. And that's where a lot of products came in helpful, because what I did find was a lot of ed tech companies out there started to offer free trials of their software as this sort of went along. So companies like Screencastify or Nimbus, you could use their products for free. And there's a whole bunch of them. And of course, a lot of educators, because we don't always have all the resources we want, we jumped on that. But it's funny when you're in group chats with people or email chains or whatever, you're on Twitter, everyone's freaking out because we've developed all these resources with these free trials, and these free trials are going to end. We're going, oh my God, are we going to lose all this stuff? Because we know we can't actually afford to buy it. It's been like Christmas. So I don't know how that's going to work out. That might just been work that we lost, and we'll have to go to our administration and say, hey, look, I did this with Flipgrid, and I really want a subscription to Flipgrid now. Can you help me out? But yeah, it's been, the engagement part has worked. It's high school, so traditionally in high school, this time of year, it's starting to really slow down anyway. So this week, if I'm honest with myself, the engagement of my students has been a little bit, and I know why. They know the end is near. They've got their final things that they're working on, and they know that there's not an urgency to every day be talking to me. But personally, my engagement's been good. I know there are some students in our school that have struggled with engagement, but hopefully with what we've learned, if we ever have to go back to this, we can improve on that.
That's great. Well, that's a great point, and that's a great segue into my next question. Students and teachers have had to pivot and realign themselves based on the pandemic that's been taking place. Claire, this is a question for you. Based on your organization, have you seen that your organization, based on resources, has had to also pivot and change?
We've definitely seen that we've had to pivot internally to adapt to the new reality, I suppose you could say. And I think just like everybody else, we're working every day, right? And every day, something else clicks into place and it gets easier and we're more successful. As far as what we're trying to do as an organization to help students, to help teachers, to help parents and remote workers, we're still supplying the exact same products that we always have done. Obviously, they're tangible goods. So, there is a supply chain behind them. They're still available to be purchased. Where we did notice was a big uptake in arts and crafts going into the pandemic as people started to do different things at home. And we realize how important that is for students as well, whether, as I said before, whether it's part of an arts program or whether it's just something to do, to be a creative outlook. So through our derwentart.com website, we launched a whole section based on art at home. And so it's really a way to sort of reach out and to engage with anybody out there, students, parents, teachers, anybody, and just give them some new skills that they can learn. So, how to start doing art when you've never touched a pencil or never touched an Inktense block before. So there's some cool things on there. So there's your basic, how to do calligraphy, how to draw, a butterfly, a bird, things like that. But then there's also some new and unique things where you can engage with your students or with your children, how to do tie-dye, t-shirt using Inktense blocks, how to paint flower pots, just different activities. So we've really been trying to sort of reach out virtually to give people ideas of things to do to make the situation better.
That's great. So being now that we are somewhat in a hybrid situation, more so from a work perspective versus school, and I'm seeing that in the future, just based on my son that's at university and my daughter going back into grade 12, so I believe that there will be a hybrid solution because we haven't come to the end of this pandemic yet. This is really open to everybody. What do you foresee that is going to be happening in the future, and how can we set up for it?
It's interesting because across the country, we are in a hybrid situation. We have provinces who have brought their students back into the classroom. We have provinces that have brought their teachers back into the classroom. So, we really are seeing a shift already in what the future is going to look like. Nobody has a crystal ball. Nobody can predict what September is going to look like for sure. But I think the learnings that we've had from this period since March to now is definitely going to help us prepare for what September will look like if we do remain in this hybrid situation. I've spent a lot of time looking at what's happening in Europe because they're ahead of us on this journey, and they're not still ramped up 100%. They're still working at, I think 50% capacity is the highest, and that is in Hong Kong. So I think September is going to be interesting, but I think we've learned a lot, and we have the right products and partners to make sure that students are prepared, make sure that educators are prepared in both the elementary and secondary world as well as the post-secondary world. Some of the stats are staggering in that post-secondary world in terms of the number of students that don't have access to their own device or internet, and they were reliant on the computer labs from the institutions or from their residents. There's so much to think about what September is going to look like, but I do honestly feel that we have, from a Staples Business Advantage perspective, we have learned a lot. We've listened to our customers and to our vendors, and I feel we're prepared to help support across the country.
And what about you, Remy? Any insights?
Yeah, if I can add to that, I think definitely Maggie is 100% right in saying that across the country, we've already started a hybrid or blended learning environment. I think as we, as an organization, work with districts and ministries from British Columbia to New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, a lot of folks are already starting to think as a school institution that we have to be ready for what's considered a synchronous, asynchronous learning environment. And all of the resources and tools need to start empowering the educator and the student to support both environments. So, and I think we're at a time now where individualized learning and the support for that is ever more critical. So I think from our own perspective as an organization, it's something that, to be honest, we've kind of been trying to support and preach for many months and years. And I think that this is the time where we need to really lean in and look at how do we support great educators like Jeff, because the answer is not one size fits all. It might be different for every educator. It might be different for every student or every region. But I will say that the idea of being able to support the educator to work with a child, one day they're in the classroom and one day they're at home, where another group of children might be at home for the full learning environment, or whether everyone's in the classroom. But I think this time period has really actually challenged us as parents, as educators, and as ed tech companies to think about and pivot to see how can we support our students learning irrespective of the environment that they're in, and how can we really be effective in all those modes of learning. And I think that's really fascinating, and it's super exciting to be part of the education industry right now, even though there are so many challenges.
And just from a trends perspective, I mean, I think what's really interesting is, as you said, Maggie, at the beginning of the call, or at the beginning of the podcast, sorry, we were not expecting this pandemic to happen. Do you foresee any trends happening in the school boards? And Jeff, please engage in this answer. Do you see any new trends happening, being that we have, this new world in the educator system?
Yeah, absolutely. I think students are going to be very disappointed because there will be no more snow days. We have been able to arm them with the technology that even if the buses don't run, they can still get their education. In terms of trends, definitely, I think we need to make sure that our students are in a proper setting to receive their education. So I think it's important that we have dedicated space where they have proper furniture that allows them the same flexibility that they would have in the classroom. So where they're sitting at a table that fits them and a chair that fits them, that they have all of the resources that they would have in the classroom that they have at home. I do think, to Rami's point, we are going to see a hybrid where the teachers in the classroom some days and directing lessons from home some days, and so that half the students will be in the classroom one day and half the next day, until there's a vaccine. It's really up in the air. So I think from a furnishing perspective, I think from a technology perspective, we need to make sure that all the students have access. That's the number one thing, with and not only devices, but obviously with access to the internet, and that our teachers have the ability to be who they are and stay authentic. Working from a corporate perspective like me, I can tell you that sitting in front of my computer for 8 hours on video calls has been very challenging because that's not what I'm used to. So I can't even imagine what an educator would feel like, because as I mentioned earlier, they are used to walking around and being animated and, joking with their students. And it's hard to get that engagement when you're just sitting in front of a computer. So I think it's really important. And I am starting to see people, directors of education across the country, starting to think that way, that they need to be prepared from a furnishing and as well as a technologies.
Yeah, great answer. And what about for you, Jeff? Any trends that you're seeing?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you about the lack of snow days, but it used to be the dog did my homework, but now the excuse is my internet wasn't working. So I think those two things we'll see will balance out over time. It's really great to hear what everybody's saying, because if you know anything about the education system, those decisions sort of work their way down. And sometimes the people in the classroom are the last to get that information. So I know, because I was at my school this morning to put some stuff away, that the number one conversation on every single teacher's mind is, what's it going to look like in September? And the answer is, we haven't been told anything yet. So it's great to hear that there's discussions going on. But in my opinion, we're at a really critical time, because the sooner teachers know what's going on, the sooner we can start to make plans for what that model may look like. So if we find out what that model is the 3rd or 4th week of August, really we'll just be reactionary. So when we heard the announcement about an increase in synchronous learning, that caught a lot of teachers off guard, because we hadn't, been directed about that before. So we all suspect, like you all do, that it'll be a hybrid model and we'll have to do some asynchronous and synchronous learning, but we haven't been told that. So that information is important. It's really cool to hear that those discussions are happening. And I guess the other thing, the furnishing thing is interesting, because I think if you came to my classroom, my furniture is not very comfortable, which is really great. And I'm grateful that because I'm participating in the Staples, it's refurnishing my classroom. So I do appreciate that donation. I'm joking. That's not happening. But you're right. When kids are comfortable, they certainly learn better. And, my daughter likes to work on her bed, and we try to convince her to sit down on a chair and get her work done, and all those sorts of things. If the products or if the facility is there and they use it, their learning is going to be a lot better. So hopefully we've learned from this. Hopefully kids are better connected, because that's the key. And then when they're connected, all these products that you guys have that are so awesome are going to be even that much more effective.
That's awesome. So this is my last question. And being that this podcast is most likely going to be heard by parents, educators, school boards, even students, do you have any tips and tricks to share with our listeners that may be listening to this podcast?
So I'm just thinking from a parent perspective, I think parents really need to give themselves a break. They need to do what works for them, for their family, for their lifestyle, for their children's age, learning capabilities, what they're having to endure at work. I think, expecting that all parents are going to be able to do the exact same thing is a little bit unrealistic. And I don't think anybody has that perception from a teacher's perspective, but sometimes parents put that on each other. So if one parent is, super successful because they've got a great strategy, then other parents might feel a little bit, oh gosh, I'm a bit behind. I think everybody just needs to do what works for them. Trial and error is exactly what happened for us in the beginning. Like I said, you have to find out what works for your child, your lifestyle, and really just ensure that the child's mental health and confidence is kind of at the forefront of everything you're doing, and just make sure that they're keeping positive about school, and that you're also keeping yourself in a good space, because it is a lot all of a sudden to juggle. So I think parents just need to do what works for them.
That was well said. You know what? I think we have to remember that learning happens in many different ways. So just because you didn't get that math covered that you thought you were supposed, when was the last time you had to factor a quadratic equation, right? Like when you miss out on maybe a little bit of math, your child is learning something else, and on top of that, you get to spend time with your kids. So I think as hard as this is, there's a lot of value that comes out of the relationships that you get to develop with your family, because you're forced to spend more time with them. And looking back, as things start to open up, my wife and I are saying, well, geez, we were kind of like having these family dinners. We haven't had them forever. And now they're not here all the time because they're working and stuff. So I think that as hard as it is, there's a lot of things that we can value there, and do what you can and look after yourself. And learning happens in lots of different ways. And sometimes you don't know that you've learned it until it comes later down the road. It's okay to fail, because sometimes the best learning happens when you try something and it doesn't work. And then when you come back to that same situation, you remember, I'm not going to do it that way, because last time I did it, it didn't work out that way. So we always say that as teachers, that embrace failing. It's okay if kids try something and they fail it. And I think we really have to remember that. Not because they fail and they don't get the grade they want, but because they fail and they learn a really important lesson, and that makes them better a month from now, 6 months, or later on 2 years from now when they're back in the same situation.
I think that's a great answer. What about for you, Remy? Any response from you?
I've been using this time personally to even reflect and learn a bit about the history of education and where we've come to today as individuals, compared to 50, 60, 100 years ago. And I think it's really neat what Jeff was sharing, and I think it's really important for us as individuals. And I don't have a lot of tips and tricks for parents or teachers, because I'm not a parent myself, so I can only imagine what that experience is like at home. But what I will share that I've been reflecting on is, I think the idea of change mindset is really significant, and this time period, sometimes is chaotic, or sometimes change can lead to confusion or concern or uncertainty. But I think it's really important to note that this is also a great time period for us as a society to move forward in a style of education that might be much more meaningful for our children, that we all care so much and spend all of our time and really try to empower and work on their education. What I really want to share is just that even though there's uncertainty, and yes, we don't know what it's going to look like exactly in July 1st, August 1st, September 1st, We don't know how many students are going to be in the room, or if any students are going to be in the room or not. I might not have the same worksheet that I was going to give my math assignment to and be able to do the exam in the exact same way. However, I think what's really important is, as we look at organizations, even organizations are facing this change. So organizations are transitioning to working from home, and maybe there's benefits to this environment and spending more time with our families. I think learning happens in a lot of diverse modes. And again, I'll go back to the idea that individualized learning looks a lot different than the classroom style that we've had for the past many years. And I think this is just kind of put us in a framework or in a position to rethink that. So I think being open and having a change mindset that's willing to accept change and, I mean, systematically, scientifically assessed correctly, but at the same time, just being open to change is something that we all as a society are learning through this time period. And I think, and I'm very optimistic that greatness will come through it in terms of where our education system will go moving forward.
Well, I wanted to take this opportunity to thank all of you for participating in the BIZCHAT podcast. And I'm sure there's a lot of valuable information for educators, parents, and even students. So thanks again.
Thanks, Karen.
Thank you.